probably I contribute that's the point here. And although we have to wait for the result of the next census, and my impression is that the Chinese residents have become better off and better educated. Second, the rise of China will contribute to Chinese participation in American politics. During the entire American history, China had often been weak, poor, and repressive. It is natural for Americans to take the Chinese civilization lightly. Just as a backward China doesn't reflect well on the Chinese community here in the city, a progressive China will change the perception of the Americans, including the Chinese Americans themselves. Finally, America has become more diverse and more open. The election of Barack Obama as American president reflects and reinforces the progress made by America. A society that cherishes individual achievement and appreciates the value of diversity will make it easier for the Chinese participation. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hu. Now we have a period of questions and answers. And in the Allo-American principle of squatter sovereignty, you'll permit the moderator to perhaps ask the first question, and then we'll open up to everyone here tonight. Dr. Hu and Dr. Salvo, I had recently read a survey that was taken comparing New York to California. And I believe part of the survey was also in The Economist magazine. It did not compare New York and California that much, but it did emphasize California. Now, California sends to the U.S. House of Representatives 9 Latinos and 3 Asians. Now, California has a little bit less than twice the population of New York. We don't have any Asians representing New York in the House of Representatives. And whereas California has 9 Latinos, based upon population, we only have 2, which is much less than 50% of Californians. Why has New York's various minorities not been able to get into government and positions of power through elected means, unlike the state of California? Now, Dr. Hu mentioned John Liu. Not only is he the only member of the New York City Council who's Asian American and Chinese American, he's the first serious candidate in the Asian American community to run for citywide office. He is running for controller since Bill Thompson has to vacate it to run for mayor. And in the assembly, there is only 1 Chinese American represented there. Having served in the New York State Senate, there are no Asians at all. So, to both of you, why is New York slack in this area? Why hasn't New York caught up to California by at least having half the representation they have in the Congress? Dr. Hu? Dr. Salvo?
To tell the truth, I don't know California that well, and
But you know New York?
Reasonably well. Yeah. For me, probably we have witnessed the increased number of Asian Americans, especially Chinese American, but I still think that the number is still rather small in terms of percentage. And the number is cited, and there are about 3% of Chinese and in Chinese American voters in New York City. I really doubt 3% makes a deep impression. And also, this is my idea. New York City is famous for this kind of like ethnic politics, and probably be rather difficult for people to ethnic minority to rise to the occasion. Let me just give you a kind of like anecdote here. And in New York, probably people will call each other, say, "Oh, you're Italian and I'm Chinese," or something like that. And but in other places, people will not kind of like pigeonhole you like that. But in New York City, people just treat you like you're a certain group of people, not just an average person. That's my superficial answer.
Thank you, Dr. Salvo.
I'm going to ask Frank, my colleague, to come up here and
Frank
help me out
Foddy?
a little bit with this. I am not a political scientist. I'm not going to pretend to be. So what I can offer you, and what Frank has done, ask Frank to say a few words. You saw what I presented before about the mixtures that we have here. If you take a look at that overlay against all the turf in New York City, I want you to ask yourselves, in all fairness, how difficult or easy is it to build an ethnic coalition? And then go ahead to California. I am somewhat familiar with California's demography. California is going to be approaching, I guess, 38 or 40 million people, size of a country. And I want you to think about the fact that while they do have diversity, the mix you find here, intense in the city of New York, and the absence of a mix in a lot of the other places, perhaps allows coalitions, ethnic and racial, to build in ways that you don't see them here. Beyond that, I really can't say, because I am not familiar with voting patterns. I'm not familiar with how the whole political side works. I leave that to the political scientists. But Frank, do you want to say a few words about this?
I'll take a shot at it.
Yeah.
We don't have the map up, any of the maps by race, any of the track maps by race on this slideshow, do we?
Not here. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't.
If we have maps that we often show that take the 117 or so census tracts that the city is broken up into small areas, 4,000, 5,000 people areas. And we do it by race. We do white, non-Hispanic, black, non-Hispanic, Hispanic, Asian, non-Hispanic. Or you can do it by Chinese or Irish or Italian or whatever. And it's very interesting to see the patterns. And you keep mentioning John Lew and Flushing. The one spot where you'll see this very heavy dose of Asians is Flushing, downtown Flushing. There's two zip codes in there, 113 and 11355 and 11354, which essentially is what we call downtown Flushing, near Main Street and Roosevelt Avenue, that area. And it's very heavily Asian. Chinese think it's a third Chinatown. The Koreans think it's Koreatown. And they're the major groups that are in there. And then there's a whole slew of other, from Afghanis on up and down the eastern and western Chinese groupings in that area. So that has, where it's replaced a population downtown Flushing that was, for the last 30 or 40 years, is basically Jewish. High-rise apartment houses built after, just before and after World War II, that at that point became Jewish, with people moving particularly out of Brooklyn and out of Manhattan to that new Flushing community, which is now 50 or 60 years old. The rest of the surrounding areas is still a mix of old European white and Asians moving eastward, out toward through Murray Hill, out to Bayside, moving out on the North Shore, straight out, which is what everybody else has done. Nobody in New York moves much differently than the previous souls who lived in those neighborhoods. It's not done by race, it's not done by color, it's done by where you live, how the transportation works, what your economic situation is. If you got to Flushing, you've got some money. You don't live in Queens, like don't live in Staten Island without money. Maybe on the North Shore here and there you can survive in Staten Island without money. Anywhere else in Staten Island, you sort of buy your way in, you rent your way in or you buy your way in, and you have to have the cash. And Queens is the same sort of world.